Hello, it's the 26th of August. This is Renew Every Morning, and I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. So pleased you're with me as always. Well, now today we're going to be thinking from our series Living Gracefully. We're going to be thinking about this idea of being seasoned with salt. So I've got a verse in my mind from the book of Colossians. It's a lovely little book, and this book is just filled. It's one of the most mystical, wonderful letters that Paul writes. But this particular verse I'm thinking about just says this. It says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Now, isn't that nice, right? So the the instruction from Paul is, let all your conversations be full of grace, so graceful, grace-filled, lovely, seasoned with salt. Well, now, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So it's the second part of that I'm very interested in, the notion of actually, if I'm going to know how to answer everyone, that I'm going to have to be seasoned with salt. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. My wife is particularly interested in seasoning. If you know Hayley, you'll know very well that she seasons things, and she seasons things beautifully. She's not a big fan of things that don't have any seasoning on them, and it's quite an interesting idea. She always thinks it's just too bland and too plain, and she takes a lot of time over things like that. And it just struck me that there is a reason for that, a kind of mystical reason, a spiritual reason that I hadn't really thought about before. So I'm going to see if I can explore that a bit with you. Now, look. We know, don't we, we've seen this in previous studies, that words carry weight. Words are never neutral, and that is really important. We talked last time, do you remember we'd had a previous talk about the power of life and death is in the tongue? Well, words can either wound or they heal. Words can divide or they reconcile. Words drain life or they impart it. So we've got to be careful about what we're using our words to do. Are we using our words to build up or to tear down? But Paul says here, let your conversation be always full of grace and seasoned with salt. What a picture. This, in other words, he's saying not words that are bland, not words that are careless or indeed tasteless, but words that are full of grace and seasoned with the flavour of wisdom and, crucially, preservation. And so the question for us is this, is how do we make sure our words carry that kind of seasoning, if that's the metaphor we're using? So we want to talk about perhaps we could talk a little bit about salted speech. Now, let's go firstly to the ancient world, because there I think we can find, obviously, it's an ancient metaphor, so we need to think about the context in which Paul is thinking before we try and pull it forward into our own time. But in the ancient world, salt was precious. It was precious because it preserved food from decay. It added flavour and it purified it. For those Caribbeans amongst you, you'll know what saltfish is about. That's why we call it saltfish, because it's literally designed to preserve it. So to be seasoned with salt might mean here to make something worthwhile and enduring. So maybe what Paul's thinking about is whatever you're saying, make it worth listening to. And that's important. And by the way, just as while we're at it, when you're in a conversation, sometimes, we're so tempted to jump in and interrupt conversations the whole time. Well, the thing you both might be worth asking yourself is what I'm about to say worth stopping what and somebody else might be saying? Because if I'm going to make sure I introduce something into a conversation, is it worthwhile? Is it enduring? Is it purposeful? Now, Paul is really saying here, I guess, let your speech preserve life. Let it preserve life, and let it add wisdom, and let it be full of grace. So, in other words, no chatter, no corrosive gossip, but speech that builds up and blesses. And that's a high bar, right? So there is a kind of, I think what I see when I think about this is that because I'm someone who verbally processes, so I don't know what I'm thinking until I talk about it. I've got that sort of mind. I have to build into my way of being what I call a mindful pause, because in that mindful pause, I've got to allow for wisdom and insight to catch up with my brain because I go running off and just thinking about things. And actually, I need just to take a minute, just to pause, just to hold on for a second, because it's very, very important. Most of us, or certainly I don't, tend to stop before I speak. The words just rush out of my mouth faster than wisdom can catch up with them. And mindfulness is very, very important about this. So it's always important for me, particularly before I go into anything or do anything, and even while I'm in the middle of something, just to breathe in, just to smile, just to breathe out, smile, and then bring the answer. Because then in that pause, in that breath moment, what happens is that I come back to myself. And when the smile, what happens is this different energy comes into my mind. And that tiny pause can season the entire conversation. It's very important. Imagine if we thought, I don't know, imagine if in every interaction we had, we inserted that kind of a pause, breathing before reacting, letting wisdom catch up with our tongue. Imagine how different some of our relationships would have been. Imagine how less things we'd have had to take back over the years. My goodness me. Now, I do know, right, look, I work in the world of learning and development and in human inclusion, as you probably know. And there's one of these psychometric tests that people use. There's a thing called Myers-Briggs, MBTI. And there are two different wired types of people. One is a talk, think, talk person. The other one is a think, talk, think person. So analytical people are think very deeply, and then they talk, and then they think. People like me don't do that. People like me talk, then we think, then we talk some more. But it's also interesting because because we also process speech differently. So in other words, some talk and think, and they work out what they're thinking by speaking it out loud. Other people, they need the silence to think about it. Neither's right and neither's wrong, but without awareness, frustration goes. Thinkers get stifled, talkers get stifled rather, and thinkers feel a bit ambushed. But grace-filled speech, the kind we see here in Colossians 4, it kind of honors both of those rhythms, both of those ways of being in ways that I think are quite helpful because it gives space, it listens deeply, and it doesn't rush to fill the silence. So I'm thinking to myself, there might be a new mindful model, which I would call sense, think, speak. And if we begin with that, just that one more step, sense to just to think. So if you go in sense, think, speak, for the reflectors, that pause, notice gets to the heart of the question. What's the emotion in the room and what's our own state of being before our reply? If, on the other hand, you're the other way around, you go sense, speak, talk. For the verbal processes, what that would mean is you would tune you in just before you launch so that whatever comes out of your mouth will be more grounded. But I think that bit about sense at the beginning, regardless of which way you're orientated, just is an awareness key really. And it means, and I think the point that I want to draw out here is that grace-filled speech begins with sensing. Some people call it reading the room, just knowing what's going on. And so I've got for you a little SALT framework that I'm going to offer you. I just sort of created it thinking about this verse today, and I just thought it might be quite fun to just play it out with you. So what Paul is saying here is he's saying your speech must be seasoned with salt. So let's use salt as the guide then. So the S in the SALT frame is spiritual. Paul says, don't get drunk on wine, instead be filled with the Spirit. That's in Ephesians 5, right? Our speech reflects the Spirit we're filled with. Please understand that. If you're angry, then that will be reflected in your speech. Our speech reflects the Spirit that we're filled with. If we're filled with irritation, our words carry it. You can tell in an instant if you're communicating with me if I'm irritated, because it's in all the tone. You can feel it everywhere in the way I'm talking about. But if I'm filled with the Spirit, my words carry peace. They carry patience, they carry grace, and they move across the room in a very different way. They tread very lightly on the earth. But when I'm irritated and angry, my kind of speech footsteps are very heavy. They're quite violent on the earth. And that's not what we're after. We're after the S is spiritual. So the A in the SALT model then I think would be awareness. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Do you remember we studied that verse in James some days ago? And awareness here means noticing before reacting, and that's essentially what we're after here. So this is that kind of noticing. I guess it's about before you react, notice the other person's heart, notice your own inner state. And by the way, if what you're about to say isn't going to add value, then don't say it. But that mindful pause of awareness is one way that the words get seasoned with grace. The L has to be love, right? So let all you do be done in love. 1 Corinthians 16. Love is the motive behind every word. If it's not the motive behind every word, it's better for you to keep silent. Without love, even truth can wound people. With love, even correction can heal. So when love is the seasoning, those words you're about to speak will nourish people. And then finally, the T for me would be thoughtfulness. The tongue, as we know, has the power of life and death. And thoughtfulness is about choosing words carefully, careful and mindful of their awareness, of their impact, of their freightedness. Because when I speak to you, my words are encoded, and when you hear them, you have to decode them. And I need to make sure my words are spoken in such a clean way that there's no room for you to decode them in a way other than I meant them. So that doesn't mean we need to over-rehearse things. It simply means to make sure that our words carry life and not death. And by the way, you know, right, in communication, only 7% of communication is words. The other 93% of it is a combination of body language and tone. So that's important, right? You can say three words in the same way and you get a very different response. You could say, I love you. Or you could say, I love you. Same three words, but they carry very different ideas. So let's bring it together then. This salt idea then is about spiritual, speak from the spirit-filled heart. The A is about awareness, sense before you speak. The L is about love, let love be your motive. And the T is about thoughtfulness, choose words that give life. And I think that's what it means to have our conversations seasoned with salt. So how do we practice then? Well, before meeting anybody, before going into any conversation, just take a mindful breath. Lord, let my words be seasoned with salt. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. And maybe we need just a kind of reflection prompt, perhaps. I mean, let's think about this. Where in our lives, then, do we need more seasoning? Where are the conversations the kind of people that you just need to season those conversations more? Which letter of the SALT acronym maybe speaks to you most today? Is it that your words need to be spiritual? Is it you need to increase your level of awareness? Do you need to amp up the love? Or do you need to actually make sure you're being thoughtful? And how might you practice that before you speak today? So let's just finish our time together with just a very simple prayer. And it's just this. So if you hold with me for a second. And just bring yourself into calm. Bring yourself into the in-breath that brings you back to the center and makes you still. And then breathe out that smile that brings your energy into the right place. Gracious, gracious Lord, season all of my words with salt. Fill me with your spirit. Make me aware of others. Root me in love. And teach me thoughtfulness. Let every word I speak be full of grace, so that all who hear me may taste and see that the Lord is good. Amen. All right, well listen, bless you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.